despised by the public and vilified by the press. And Thursday night, she joined the Hazleton Headlines' very own Lucas Wood for an interview at the Strand. This is Marie Jacketti, the interview with Lucas Wood.
Good evening, I'm Lucas Dominic Wood, and my guest in tonight's interview joining me here at the Strand is the very controversial award-winning former Standard Speaker journalist and soon-to-be a lady politician, Marie Jacketti.
Oh, thank you for having me here tonight,
It's a
Lucas.
pleasure to have you. So now let's get right to it.
Sure.
You want to run against Jeff Cassatt for mayor in the next election. Why? What makes you a more qualified candidate than him or anyone else?
Well, that's a really great question. I almost ran for mayor during the last election. My husband became ill, and he felt very strongly about me not doing it because he thinks Hazleton politics are very corrupt and very stressful, and he didn't want that stress in his life. I did regret not running. I'm a student of public policy. I'm really not a politician. It's interesting that you referred to me in that way. I don't know that I'll ever be a traditional politician, but I do have a lot of ideas about how to get Hazleton out of its current economic crisis. And we don't only have an economic crisis, we also have a social crisis and at times environmental crises going on here too. I don't see, I don't want to pick on Jeff. He inherited a heck of a mess as mayor, and this mess was developing over decades, actually, over decades.
Yeah.
So he walked into a mess. I do see things differently than he does. For example, I am a fiscal conservative. And that means that I explore every single option before raising taxes.
I see.
Because I understand the repercussions that raising taxes in a city as poor as Hazleton has.
So if I may, you
Sure.
claim to be a conservative then?
I'm a fiscal conservative.
Okay.
And that's interesting because I'm usually called a crazy left-wing communist, wacko.
I read the comments almost every day.
Yeah, those comments are something else. I think I'm a social progressive. If in the state of Pennsylvania I could register as an independent, as many people can across the country, I would certainly register as an independent. We fought a war with England to get our independence. It does seem to me like most of us, if we're thinking that we should be independents, but in the state of Pennsylvania, we're kind of locked out. If you're registered as an independent, you're locked out of the primaries. Now, of course, who wants to be in that position, right?
Yeah.
Now, you can switch for the primaries to Republican or Democrat each time. That's pretty laborious. And a lot of people just don't want to go through that, so they pick Democrat or Republican Party to run for. But many of my ideas are independent and actually libertarian, I would say.
All right. Okay. Well, then I guess my next question is basically pointless, but...
What is that?
Well, it says in the comment section of the Hazleton Headlines Facebook page, a claim was made that you hated conservatives.
Oh, boy.
Somebody did say that, actually.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So, do you?
No,
Being that you are
I guess I would be hating myself then, right?
Yeah, wouldn't you be?
If people who grew up in Hazleton during the era when I come from a poor coal mining family. I mean, we didn't even know what a fiscal conservative was.
Yeah.
All we really knew was that we had to put every penny, every dollar that we received under a microscope, and we had to really think very hard about how we were going to spend it. And if we didn't do that, if we squandered our money, we were in very deep trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, so by nature, growing up in the era that I did, in a coal mining family, I had to be a fiscal conservative. But right now, given America's economic situation, we have not ever really recovered from the 2008 recession completely.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine why people aren't fiscal conservatives, why we aren't examining every penny, every dollar that we spend. I think we should be, especially when we look at the consequences of raising taxes.
Yeah.
And we're a poor city. And if we raise taxes, we are going to become even more distressed.
All right, so I think you'd agree that you have more critics than you do supporters. Does that hurt your pride? Because a lot of people question, like, at least I do, how do you, like, go about your day-to-day life with the strength that you do when you're basically a victim to bullying, you know? A lot of people say mean things about you.
Oh, they say horrendous things
I
about
read them.
me. I've been threatened, harassed, libeled, slandered.
You have a lot of critics.
I have a lot of friends, too. I think that they're gentle people and they don't really speak up as much.
No.
And I honor their space and their speech. It's easy to be a bully and to monopolize media. You know, I can't say that I'm not shocked by some of the comments, because I am. But I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who once said, only you can allow yourself to feel, when somebody, I am really not paraphrasing
okay.
Eleanor Roosevelt very well.
We'll look it up later on.
We'll look it up later on, but basically she was saying, in order to be insulted or in order to feel bad, you have to allow that. You have to allow it. And I guess the best answer I could give to your question is, I'm not allowing it. I'm just not allowing it.
That's great. Could we talk about the episode that happened with the Trump protest
Sure.
back in January?
Sure. What
I
would you like to know?
Well, I want to know if you feel any remorse for the things that you said to the people who opposed the anti-Trump protest in which you did organize back in January.
That is such a long and complicated story. Can we start from the beginning?
Absolutely. Take all the time you need. We could
okay.
even bring in this letter later.
Okay, so I am not a Republican hater by any means. I've voted for many Republicans, but I am not a supporter of Mr. Trump. I think he's a catastrophic president, and he's only been in office a few months, and basically we have on a day-to-day basis chaotic government. Let's start from the beginning, though.
Okay.
I rather knew that this would happen if he would be elected president. I didn't think that America would elect him president. However, when I found out that he did, I thought I was living in the twilight zone like 100 million other Americans. I woke up to this unbelievable event. And I decided that there were many, many events taking place on Election Day, on Inauguration Day, and then we had the Women's March, and we had something like 100 million people over a period of days protesting this election, which many of us consider an illegal election. So I did gather about 50 people were signed up to peacefully protest using our First Amendment rights of assembly to march down Church Street and simply say, hey, he's not my president. We don't agree with this. The night before, there was a thread that appeared on Hazleton News 1, Shane Belliott's site, and a lot of hideous things were said on that site, and there was one threat to run us over, marchers, with a truck if we stepped onto the street, which it's a little hard not to when you're walking down Church Street.
Definitely.
You know? And so I questioned Shane about this, and he said, well, if you have a problem with this, call the police. And I did. That evening, and they were dealing with a homicide. The Hazleton police were dealing with a genuine, bona fide homicide.
Okay.
They were stressed. They're usually always shorthanded.
Yeah.
But they listened, and they said that they would monitor the march and drive around.
Okay.
They would, and I think that was the best they could do
Yeah.
under the circumstances. But the problem was, a lot of people read Hazleton News 1,
Yeah.
including people who were going to march that day. And so after this thread appeared on Hazleton News 1, I started to get calls and emails saying, basically, some people said they had to do other things, but other people were very honest and said, hey, we just got threatened. I'm not marching. Okay. So where do you draw the line between First Amendment speech and interfering with the First Amendment rights of assembly? Because that's really what happened to us. We went from 50 people down to about 10 for the march. So I was already angry by that point because I felt that our right to assemble under the First Amendment was tampered with.
Yeah.
Okay?
Good boy.
And also, a lot of the other things that were being said on social media were just clearly lies. In fact, we were being called violent and supporters of violence, and here we were being threatened with violence. Okay, now you can understand that by this point I'm feeling pretty hot.
Yeah, definitely.
And I wonder if you wouldn't feel that way too, if your First Amendment rights were being interfered with. So we got to the day of the march, and Shane was there filming, and he knows all of this. I've spoken to him about this. I believe it was selective filming. It lacked context because the 10 marchers were being abused by people from the street, being called all sorts of lovely names, and you've seen some of those names
Oh, definitely.
that I'm called. One of them was communist, which it was pretty hilarious since we were exercising our First Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is laughable or tragic, but there were a couple of, maybe 3 or 4 Trump cheerleaders across the way, and they were saying some things to us. I studied Russian in college. I had a year of intensive Russian, and I was a Cold War child. There were 5 people in my Russian class at King's College. It was a brutal class. Nobody would take that class unless they were interested in helping the United States with national security. They were like people who wanted to work the FBI, do military intelligence, those kind of things. I was on the road to being a foreign correspondent. So I ought to help my country. So maybe I shouldn't have done this, but I said to the protesters in Russian, I asked them if they spoke Russian, говорите ли вы по-русски, and I said a couple of other things to them in Russian.
Yeah.
And they said, see, she speaks Russian, she's a communist, which was pretty hilarious, given that our president right now is embroiled in a controversy about possible collusion with the Russians. How could you make that kind of mistake? And so I don't know, that upset me, of course, being called a communist when I was exercising my First Amendment rights. And as we walked down the street, I did have a diabetic event. My blood sugar, I am diabetic, and I had a low blood sugar event in which my blood sugar went to 60. I do have a letter from my doctor here.
Yes, you do, and we'll show this to the people on screen right now.
So this is from my primary care physician. And it says, Maria Jacketti has requested that I, as her primary care provider, write this letter to clarify some misconceptions about her. Ms. Jacketti was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2014. She experienced fluctuating blood sugar levels from. This is not an uncommon occurrence in anyone with diabetes given the right circumstances. The symptoms of low blood sugar can be as benign as some sweating and mild shakiness, or as significant as confusion, disorientation, mood changes, including anger and agitation, and sometimes problems with memory. The symptoms of high blood sugar can include blurred vision, headaches that trigger migraines in those patients susceptible to them, increased peripheral neuropathy, and at times decreased cognitive function. It's not fun. It is important that these symptoms are recognized and treated quickly. I hope this helps to explain some of the seemingly erratic behaviors that have reportedly been observed during some of Ms. Jacketti's public appearances. Sandra Tobias, MSN CRNP, Geisinger Medical Group. So I cursed, I was angry, I was irate, I had a blood sugar of 60. I actually could not get into my purse to get my glucose tablets. I was at that point in cognitive function. Diabetic low blood sugar coma happens at about 40. I look sick in the video. I really
Yeah.
do. I don't look well, and I wasn't. Now, is this an excuse? No, I own what I said. You know, I talked about racism in Hazleton. I used a couple of F-bombs, yes. I doubt that I'm the first person on earth to drop F-bombs. Particularly.
Definitely not.
Definitely not, right?
No.
Okay, so, you know, I did speak about low education levels here in the Hazleton area and racism. And I said it without grace and without dignity, but I spoke the truth. Unfortunately.
All right, so we'll move on to this final question of mine. For
Just
years,
one more?
Well, just one more right now.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
So for years, you held the title of Poet Laureate in Hazleton. Recently, Cassatt appointed someone else to that job. How does that make you feel?
I was, you shared the letter that I wrote.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
I
so
did.
if people actually read the
If
letter,
they read it, yes.
they saw that I was appointing two other people, and that I was creating an expanded laureate program
That's true.
here in Hazleton. I had no problem with his appointing someone else, but he appointed a young man by the name of Josh Narrow, who's going off to college
Yeah.
in Washington in September. I've never seen Josh's poetry. I did invite him into an online group some time ago, and he was in it on the rolls for about 2 months. He accepted, but he never contributed a poem. The leader of the group then dropped him from the group. I was really looking forward to seeing some of his poetry.
Yeah.
To be a poet laureate in most cities in America or counties, or to be a state laureate, there are a couple of requirements. One is residency. You have to have boots on the ground. You have to be there to serve your community. And the second thing is you need to have at least one book published. Now, I have 8 books published, and most of them were in the 1990s, but I just, 2 years ago, I had my collection, Medusa's Hairdresser, published a book of poetry. So I have a lot of publications, including translations of Nobel laureates.
Yeah.
I also felt, though, that after 5 years, it was time for me to step aside and give somebody else a chance. During my time as laureate, we evolved the program. There is a television station in Hazleton called Telecaribe. It's a bilingual station. And I began doing bilingual poetry spots because I translated 2 Nobel laureates, Pablo Neruda and Gabriela Mistral. Most of my books before my own collection were translations, right?
Yeah.
So I started, you know, rather than just doing it old school, old style, I started to reach out through television.
Yeah.
And to broaden the audience and to bring art to the community. The next part of this that I planned was modeling a program that I was involved in when I lived in the New York City area. It was called Poets in Public Service.
Okay.
And there were 15 of us that served all of New York City, the boroughs in New York City. And we went in, we were considered poets in residence, and we went into the different schools, and we generally worked with students who were at risk.
Yeah.
And we brought art into their lives, and then we helped them put together anthologies. Every child ended up writing a poem. It boosted their self-esteem tremendously.
Wow.
And the other thing that we also saw is they became more interested in their academics and pursuing positive things rather than getting involved in criminal activity and gangs and things like that. So, you know, the whole idea behind that was art can heal, art can keep you out of negative activities such as, and we, as gangs.
Yeah.
We have tremendous problems with gangs in the city of Hazleton. So back in the 90s when I did most of this, I was paid tremendously well to do this. And since then, the economy and the arts have gone through a lot of changes, including defunding. And my plan was to take the former poet laureate before me, myself, to get a new poet laureate, Eddie Olario, who is a community leader in Hazleton, a fine poet with a book published. He actually has 2 other books now in process and is has boots on the ground, lives here, has all the qualifications to be a poet laureate, and to build this wonderful bridge between the Anglo community and the Hispanic community, a bridge that is so well needed. Eddie wanted to be poet laureate, and he certainly deserves it. Beyond this, to shine an even more positive light on the city of Hazleton, and we really need it,
Yes.
I thought that we could expand the program to include a children's literature laureate, and that was going to be Franklin Perez, who just published a book called Buttons and Zippers that just got great reviews in the Kirkus reviews. And we're fortunate to have Franklin here in Hazleton. So, you know, not everybody wants to write poetry.
No.
Franklin would have been the first children's laureate in the United States of America. And what we were going to do is, what's in public service, but we're going to do it free. You know, this is all volunteer work.
Yeah.
Free work to keep kids out of gangs. And my idea, my plan was, we would have had a YouTube channel with weekly broadcasts, poetry writing tips, literature writing tips, but also workshops in schools and workshops on the ground at the new Art League and in different places. And ideally, down the line, a fiction laureate, a playwriting laureate. These positions don't exist throughout the country yet, and we could have had them here in Hazleton first. This plan for an expanded literature program with an emphasis on bringing literature to the whole community, but focusing first and foremost on children and keeping them out of gangs, it's not going to happen.
No.
It's not going to happen. And I certainly am not saying anything derogatory about Josh Narrow, but he is not going to be here. He's going to be in college in Washington. So essentially, we have a poet laureate in name and not in presence. I believe Mayor Cassett responded and said something that I could still work with people
Yes, he did say that.
in the community. He kind of missed the point there. I was poet laureate for 5 years, and that was long enough, in my opinion. I have other things that I want to do as well. I was passing on the baton for reasons of evolving the program and moving the program forward. He did not inform me that he was making this move. Now, I have an online subscription to the Standard Speaker, and I missed the article. Apparently, the article about appointing Josh appeared 2 or 3 weeks before I sent out my letter. And I remember talking to one of my former colleagues at the paper and saying, he was saying to me, but the mayor already appointed a third laureate. And I was saying to him, that's impossible. You know, he would have had to call me.
Yeah.
He would have had to talk to me, just out of courtesy and out of respect. And then another colleague faxed me, maybe a week or 2 later, faxed me a link to the article, and I was flabbergasted.
Wow.
I was just flabbergasted. You know, the poet laureate position is not supposed to be a joke.
All right, so would you like to give a closing statement before we wrap this up?
Sure. I am not going to be running any traditional campaigns, putting up signs, spending thousands of dollars, anything like that. People can feel free to write me in for council or for mayor or for any other office that they wish. I'm really serving here as Hazleton's conscience, I believe. You know, that pretty much sums it up. As you mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of brutal attacks on me, on my family. I've had threats. This hasn't been a lot of fun. But I trust in we have laws. We're a country of laws. We have a legal system. And We also have a government with checks and balances, and we have the fourth estate, the press,
Yes.
which I believe, maybe the Washington Post and the New York Times will really be saving us. So I'm good, I'm happy, I run my own writing business. I've done a lot of public policy research, and there are solutions to saving our city. But the clock is ticking, time is running out. And especially when it comes to taxation, mega taxation is just around the corner, despite the fact that our Democratic Council is really trying to hold the line on taxes. There are solutions, and I have several of them. And I'd be happy to present them and talk to you about them. And the Democrats can use them, the Republicans can use them, the Independents can use them, the Libertarians can use them, and even my dear friend, Mayor Jeff Cassatt, can use them.
All right.
I'm not your enemy, Jeff. I want to see Hazleton succeed. I'm not happy with what you did with the Poet Laureate program, and I guess you had your reasons. I'm not your enemy. And I guess that's just,
That's it.
that's where I stand. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me here tonight.
It's a
at
real
the Strand.
pleasure, and I
Yep.
wish you all the success in the world
All
with your
right.
journalistic pursuits.
Well, thank you very much, Maria.
My pleasure.
Right.
He's arguably the most controversial.